Does the term bad boy for life still ring true for Sean Combs, aka Diddy? Is he feeling remorseful for his past actions that have him still facing a years-long prison sentence, even though he's been found not guilty on the more serious charges he once faced? Great questions, right? Well, according to new reports, it seems like the Bad Boy Records founder is seeking help while still locked up in a detention center. So is this a self-reckoning, or is it a ploy to look good for the judge?
Diddy's situation has officially crossed the line from bad to lethal, because according to insiders inside the facility, Diddy was rushed to the prison medical wing after being stabbed during a violent clash inside his cell, and the details coming out are darker, more chaotic.
Well, hard to tell, but according to reports, he signed himself up for self-help therapy programs to address his drug use and violence against women. By this point, we all know Sean Combs was found not guilty of RICO conspiracy and sex trafficking his former girlfriends Cassie and the woman known in his trial as Jane. I saw and heard both these women testify myself, and let's just say some of their testimony, I don't know if I'll be able to get it out of my brain. But maybe what they testified to actually struck a chord with Diddy. According to a report by TMZ, their sources say Sean Combs enrolled himself into a STOP program at MTC Brooklyn. So what's the STOP program? It's a course for inmates with the focus of preventing sexual assault, domestic violence, and dating violence. Oh, and per those same reports, he's reportedly undergoing therapy and in a drug abuse program reportedly conducted by Dr. Harry X. Wexler. Now, during the trial, we heard a lot about drugs: ketamine, cocaine, weed, molly, shrooms, GHB, 2C, or pink cocaine. Federal prosecutors said previously drugs were a key ingredient for the freak-offs or hotel nights or wild king nights, whatever you want to call them. Meanwhile, the defense claimed Sean Combs struggled with drug addiction, and any drug use was just personal and for private use. And we heard testimony about the rampant drug use too, from Cassie and Jane, where they both claimed they couldn't go through freak-offs or hotel nights without drugs, to the many assistants like Mia or George Kaplan, or even Brendan Paul, where they observed Sean Combs doing drugs. Some even partook in drugs to prove their loyalty, or picked up drugs on Combs' behalf. Or the many of text messages shown about drug costs, reimbursements for drugs, etc. Then another theme that played throughout the trial was the excruciating amount of testimony about domestic violence, especially during Combs' relationship with Cassie. I mean, we all saw the Intercontinental Hotel surveillance tape. We heard the subsequent apology after portions of the footage were released publicly. But we also heard about violence toward Jane, and Combs' former assistant Mia, and Cassie's stylist Deontay, and Cassie's former best friend Carrie Morgan. The defense even owned up to the domestic violence many times during the trial, something even the judge used as part of the reason to keep Combs locked up pending sentencing. The judge said during the bond hearing, at trial the defense conceded defendants' violence in a personal relationship, saying it happened in relation to Cassie Ventura and Jane. Judge Subramanian even pointed out there was violent and illegal conduct even after the HSI raids on his homes, saying that this highlights a disregard for the rule of law and a propensity of violence. But according to the report by TMZ, their source says Combs wants to use their jail programs to better himself. But there are skeptics of Combs' motivation to do the programs now. Is it too little too late, or does this polish him up for the judge so Mark Agnifilo can say in court, "Look, Your Honor, my client did these programs. He wants to be a better man"? I mean, I wouldn't put it past Mark Agnifilo to say that at the upcoming sentencing hearing. He said something along those lines of this when he was making arguments for Sean Combs to get bond after the verdict. Now, Combs reportedly started getting drug treatment before his arrest last year, even though the feds say he was found with drugs in his hotel room the night he was arrested. And Mark Agnifilo previously said Jane helped Diddy get into a batterers program before his ultimate arrest. We'll see if the self-work paid off, or if it's too little too late when Combs is ultimately sentenced in less than 3 months. Well, I'm joined now by trial attorney Adante Pointer. Adante, always great to see you. Is it no longer bad boy for life? What are your thoughts on these courses that Sean Combs is reportedly enrolled in? Are you buying that it's actually making him a better person, or do you think it's just trying to make him look better in front of the judge before sentencing?
Well, I think two things can be true at the same time. One is, yes, those courses are designed, they're instituted, they're given, they give inmates, if you will, access to those courses because the belief is those courses will help, a person's behavior and curb them from doing things that would find them in front of a judge. I also could see that serving a dual purpose. Second purpose being it makes you look much better in.
And more disturbing than anything we've heard so far, this wasn't a random scuffle. This wasn't some hallway argument gone wrong. This was personal, and it happened inside his own cell, the one place he thought he had even a scrap of control left. And now, That illusion has been ripped away. Sources say the incident erupted out of nowhere. Guards heard yelling, banging, and then a loud crash. By the time they reached the cell, the scene was chaos: overturned furniture, blood on the floor, and Diddy clutching his side while another inmate was restrained. And the most chilling part? Insiders say the weapon was homemade, a sharpened piece of metal smuggled and hidden for weeks. This wasn't impulsive. This was planned. They wanted to hurt him. And they got close, too close. People inside the facility say this is the moment Diddy finally realized the brutal truth he's been trying to block out ever since he landed behind those bars. He's not special in there. He's not a mogul. He's not a billionaire. He's not a power player. He's just an inmate. And inmates bleed.
In front of the judge, as I told all my clients, if you're doing things that the court can recognize that is actually helping you deal with the behavior that puts you in front of the judge in the first place. So here, violence against women, domestic violence is something that the courts is a big no-no in society as well as the court. And so I can see the fact that he's taking these classes being something that the judge will take into consideration during his sentencing. And on top of that, the drug class is the same thing. Because I believe, if I was Diddy's attorney and given the way the evidence came in, I'd certainly be like, look, these things happen during dark times where I was in a drug, induced haze to where I was doing and acting in ways that I am ashamed about now. But during that time, it was because drug, sex addiction, and things like that I'm now addressing.
Well, you actually kind of sound like Diddy's defense attorney, Mark Agnifilo, because he literally made essentially the exact same argument, especially during the bond hearing. But I'm curious to know, obviously there are skeptics of this where they think it's strictly just to look good, it's just for good press, all of that stuff. Yeah. But in your opinion, do you think that these courses are just too little too late? I mean, the defense was saying that he was trying to get help before, he was trying to get help to address his drug use previously, that Jane was helping him get into a batterers program. But do you think it's too little too late?
Well, it's too little too late for his victims, okay? But it's not too little too late for the rest of the people he's going to encounter while he continues to live out the rest of his life. And so you can't slam the door on redemption. You can't slam the door on someone trying to address destructive behavior. So I think, he does get some kudos for enrolling in the program and for the efforts he made prior to finding himself in federal court facing all of those charges. So I think it does go to his credit, but you're right. Critics and skeptics, sometimes they'll just never be satisfied. And for, well-founded reasons. When you have someone who has a documented history such as him and you see the videos and you hear the testimony, his problem goes deeper than a 30-day, program. Not that these programs are 30 days, but just to say it's going to take long-term and commitment to the long-term results in order for us to really have confidence that he's not going to engage in such disturbing behavior.
And it's interesting too, because I think the public reaction to this verdict was really kind of split down the middle. I was really thinking it was going to be one way. I was at the courthouse. It was a completely different kind of beast and animal that was going on after the verdict happened. There were people with the baby oil. It was a crazy day after the verdict happened. But I know some analysts were kind of comparing it to the O.J. Simpson verdict, but it seemed like the reaction was really kind of split down the middle. A lot of people upset with the jury's decision, but then there were a lot, surprisingly, celebrating the verdict. What are your thoughts?
Well, my entire time looking at the case, the charges, and listening, to the evidence as it came in during trial, I thought that depending upon how a person, be it a juror, be it the public, comes into the trial believing how someone who's a victim should act and how they believe relationships can evolve or devolve and fall apart is the lens that they would then make their verdict. Why I say that is because if you think a person who's battered, someone who's been a victim, someone who's been assaulted in the ways that were described, most people have an idea as
Witnesses say when guards pulled him out, he was shaking, pale, clutching himself while blood soaked through the towel they wrapped around him. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't acting tough. He looked stunned, like the reality of prison life just hit him with full force. They rushed him to the medical unit immediately. Emergency treatment. Multiple officers guarding the doors. The entire facility going on temporary lockdown. And behind all the official statements about procedures and safety protocols, everyone knows the truth. Diddy is now officially a target. The attack came fast, silent at first, the kind of coordinated move that only happens when people inside have been watching, waiting, studying his schedule, his movements, the weak points in his routine. The cell door slammed behind the assailant, that heavy metal thud echoing like a countdown starting, and in those seconds, the mogul tried to stand tall, tried to summon whatever aura he used to carry with him outside these walls, but that aura had no weight here. The attacker didn't hesitate.
How they will respond and act towards that, or their expectation if it happened to their loved one, how they'd expect their loved one to act. And in those situations, you don't expect someone to be tweeting, you don't expect somebody to be sending texts telling their abuser that they love them or that they want more of what took place. However, there are other people who see it from maybe more so the lens of a victim or someone who's been abused, who would say, you know what, that's not so beyond the pale of reason, because the abuse has been so entrenched in this person's mind that they then fall in love with their abuser. And so that's not something that they would, look askance upon or look down upon. So, one of the things about being in trial that I always remind my clients, is that despite all the rules that the judge gives people, no one leaves their life experience or their opinions at the courthouse door. It all makes its way into the courtroom and ultimately into the jury room. And that's why you can see such people who are on one side, like celebrating Diddy being acquitted on the much more serious charges, and other people who are like, how did this happen? I am upset. I feel like victims did not get justice today.
Right, exactly. And emotions did run really high, especially when the verdict came down, because I think I myself was pretty surprised at some of the jury's decisions in relation to some of the charges where they found him not guilty. But, obviously they made their decision. They listened to the evidence. They saw all the exhibits and they made the decision that they did. And say come sentencing that Sean Combs is sentenced to maybe a couple years behind bars in prison. But do you think even after this trial, after everything that we've learned, after the many civil lawsuits that were also filed, do you think that there's any type of way that Sean Combs can have a comeback at this point?
Well, I think there's certainly a comeback that could be crafted and created, in which we as the public may see. Listen, this is a person who has lived his life in the public light, in the limelight, for decades. Okay. And so, as has been said before, fame is one of the more addictive or most addictive drugs known to man. And so he was a very famous, and now some might say infamous person. The idea that he allows the narrative to end with the way in which the evidence came in and this kind of mixed bag verdict does not is not what's the word I'm looking for? If I don't see Diddy allowing the last chapter of his book to be written with this trial, instead, the person that he's held himself out to be and who we now understand him to be is someone who is going to say, look, this was a dark chapter in my life, but now I'm going to show you the phoenix rising from the ashes. And there are other chapters. And I think that he will make an even more concerted effort to be more philanthropic, to be more of a victim's advocate. And also, once he completes these programs, he can say, look, I was once an abuser of women, abuser of drugs, abuser of fame, abuser of power and fortune, but look who I am now. And so I think that's a pretty powerful story. And frankly, people love comeback stories.
Yeah, they do love a good comeback story, but I'm curious, in your opinion, do you think that this is all just for maybe a showmanship, or do you think it's all for PR? So that way, Diddy can walk out of MDC Brooklyn or possibly a potential prison and just be like, you know what, I am a changed person. But all
A flash of metal carved the air, a grunt, a gasp, a stumble, then the impact, hot, searing pain hitting his ribs like fire being shoved under his skin. He fell back against the bunk, grabbing the edge with shaking hands. But the attacker wasn't done. He lunged again, the sharp weapon slicing the air, the mogul barely dodging as another blow crashed against the mattress. His heart slammed in his chest as he scrambled, his breath sharp, erratic. His voice cracked as he shouted for help, but inside prison walls, help doesn't come fast, not unless there's already blood on the floor. And there was, dark, thick, dripping onto the concrete. The attacker's eyes were locked in a cold rage, like he'd been waiting years for this. Like this moment wasn't just violence, it was justice, revenge, something ancient and personal, and the mogul could see it. He could feel it. The prison lights above flickered as if the whole building was holding its breath. When the guards finally tore the door open,
Also, in that same breath, what kind of message do you think that sends to victims out there who may have been abused or, something had happened to them by a high profile figure? They want to report this to police. They want to either go to maybe a civil lawyer, all of that stuff. But then after this trial, they are like, no, I can't do that. Look what happened in this case. What are your thoughts on
Yeah.
that?
Well, there are definitely people who are victims advocates and victims themselves who think that this trial serves to kind of throw cold water, if you will, and chill victims who might want to come forward to express what happened to them, to initiate a criminal case, to initiate a civil case. They look at this case and say, at what cost is it to me personally to have to bare my soul, to only then be grilled on cross-examination, to have all of my intimate details bantied about, in the media, and then to be judged, and then go through all of that, and I walk away in some ways empty-handed. Now, that's certainly one way of looking at things, and there's a lot of credibility as it relates to understanding how someone could feel that way.
Mhm.
The flip side, because remember, the scales of justice isn't just one side, there's two sides. The
Mhm.
other side, if you will, is at what point in time does a person pay in full their price to society? And then once they've paid the price for their transgressions, at what point do you then look at that person and feel like, hey, you could be a changed person. You can redeem yourself. There's things that you can do to essentially prove to us as members of the public, as clients, as customers, that you know what, you're a changed man. And so that's the hill Diddy has to climb. Whether he climbs that hill or not remains to be seen, but it's definitely a hill that's in front of him. And some might say it's not a hill, it's a mountain.
It is a mountain for Diddy. I think it might honestly be Mount Everest. It's a large mountain for him to scale, for I think people to possibly forget in their conscious what we learned in this trial. And I remember when Sean Combs, we've been covering this since Cassie's lawsuit, since 2023, November of that year. And I just remember thinking that there would be some type of reckoning within the hip hop community, the Black community, as far as Me Too goes, something kind of similar. And I thought, possibly, and I think maybe other people thought so too, that maybe Sean Combs was kind of that person that would, bring about this kind of reckoning in the hip hop community as far as Me Too goes. But do you think that can still happen? Do you think that will still happen?
Well, I think that Diddy's trial, served as a clarion call, a wake up call, canary in the mine, so to speak, as it relates to you could be as powerful, as popular, as wealthy as Diddy. I mean, keep in mind, he called himself Brother Love. He got the key to New York City in
Yeah,
the months or the year leading up to all of this, right?
yeah.
And he was sitting on what some might say is the highest pedestal. And look how far he has fallen.
Mhm.
Now, at the same time, you have that going on. And so people can look, if you really look at the case, and not just the legal case, but the case in the court of public opinion. And victims, if you will, won. Because he has, not only did he have a criminal case he had to deal with, but he has what, upwards of 20, 30 civil cases
I think
that
even
he's
more than
also going to have
that.
to deal with.
Yeah.
Yeah. And each one of those cases, even if it's not proved by the victim that it happened, he is still going to have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in attorney fees for each and every single case, and maybe millions for the more serious and those that get further.
everything exploded. They yelled commands that no one listened to, bodies clashing, metal dragging, boots slamming the floor. The mogul collapsed forward, clutching his side, blood sliding between his fingers as they dragged him out. His breathing was ragged, his face pale, his eyes wide with the shock of a man who had just realized he wasn't untouchable anymore. The guards shouted for medics while inmates pressed against their cell doors, watching, whispering, feeding the fire of rumors that were already morphing into legends. Inside the medical wing, the fluorescent lights felt brutal, too bright, too revealing. His skin glistened with sweat as the nurses pressed gauze against the wound, trying to slow the bleeding. Every time they touched him, he winced like the pain was shooting straight through his spine. He stared at the ceiling as the reality sank in. He wasn't just someone who had fallen from grace. He was prey, vulnerable, marked. Even the medical staff knew it. They whispered to each other while they worked, glancing at him with a mixture of pity and unease. They'd seen stabbings before.
A prostitution business for profit. Again, trying to distinguish between Combs' conduct and these cases. He never did any of this for profit, they argued. And they even cite the 1953 U.S. Attorney's Manual that says, quote, as a general rule, prosecution should not be instituted in the so-called non-commercial cases. And they claim the Department of Justice manual today, quote, makes clear that the prosecution of customers involved in an 18 U.S.C. 2421 offense, like Mr. Combs here, is now limited to prosecuting those who engage in commercial sex with victims of sex trafficking, in addition to those who otherwise perpetrate or facilitate human trafficking offenses. And in the absence of any sex trafficking charge, however, it is clear that the standalone Mann Act counts never would have been prosecuted. That seems true. I think you ask any legal expert, they will say if all the government had against Sean Combs was the transportation to engage in prostitution charges, just the prostitution charges, they probably wouldn't have gone after him. They coupled it with racketeering and they coupled it with sex trafficking. I agree with that. I don't think that they would have gone after him just for that. Anyway, the defense highlights how modern day prosecutions of Johns is really when you're talking about exploiting vulnerable foreigners who don't speak English well, which again is not the case here. And they highlight how the only potentially comparable case in New York is where you had a retired police officer and a former judge who apparently hired women to have sex with a male fraternal group called the Jesters. But Combs' attorneys say, while there was no profit there, there's no profit here, there was sex trafficking of those prostitutes. That's what's different. Again, Combs was acquitted of sex trafficking in this case. And here's the main point, quote, moreover, the cases which involve defendants similarly situated to Mr. Combs have been released on bond pending sentencing. In reviewing the cases across the country where the primary or sole conviction was for a violation of 18 U.S.C. 2421, the defendants who were not charged with running a prostitution business have been released pending sentencing. And then Combs' attorneys make another argument for why Combs' conditions are exceptional. And it's about him being locked up at the MDC. They say that a district court judge in the Southern District in another case basically said how bad the MDC is. As Judge Furman noted, the state of affairs at MDC is unacceptable. In so noting, Judge Furman concluded that the conditions in the MDC qualify as exceptional reasons under the statute justifying, and this was the defendant in this case, Chavez's continuing release. Judge Furman found that the conditions at the MDC are, quote, dreadful in many respects, but three warrant particular emphasis. 1. Continued reports of inordinate periods of lockdown. 2. Claims that the facility provides inadequate and or substantially delayed necessary medical care, a particular risk in this case. And 3. General issues about the conditions at the facility. These conditions have not abated in Mr. Combs' detention at the facility. As the court is aware, during Mr. Combs' incarceration at the MDC, the facility was subject to an interagency suite that was designed to achieve our shared goal of maintaining a safe environment for both our employees and the incarcerated individuals housed at MDC Brooklyn. They're actually quoting what the rationale was. In other words, there is a significant issue at the MDC related to the safety of employees and incarcerated individuals that require outside law enforcement action from multiple agencies to address. Importantly, MDC as a jail,
countless ones, but this was different. This was the highest profile inmate the facility had held in years, maybe ever, and now he was lying there shaking, muttering under his breath, trying to process the fact that someone had come inches from ending him. Meanwhile, the prison erupted. Inmates traded stories, each version more extreme than the last. Some said he provoked it. Some said he owed someone. Others said the attacker was trying to earn stripes. But the most chilling rumor the one that spread through the block like wildfire, was that the attack had been ordered. That someone outside, someone with grudges, someone with reach, had found a way to send a message through steel bars and concrete walls. Back in the medical wing, he kept asking the same question over and over through clenched teeth. Is he still out there? His voice trembled every time, and the guards didn't answer. They couldn't promise anything. They couldn't offer safety. They could only stand there, hands on their belts, watching him unravel. And unravel he did. The moment the guards
has a significant law enforcement presence within its walls 24 hours per day that are equipped with investigatory and often unregulated authority. Thus, the requirement of outside law enforcement agencies to ensure safety within the MDC is an admission that serious violence, mayhem, and chaos is occurring within the MDC that requires more than a Band-Aid raid, but rather surgery. Indeed, we are aware of ongoing threats of violence and actual violence in the facility such that Mr. Combs' safety is constantly at risk. And they go on to argue, though Mr. Combs has been a model inmate for his nearly year-long period of confinement, the violent conditions are still very much a concern for Mr. Combs and is an unnecessary confinement risk given the clear precedent of multiple similarly situated Mann Act convictions where defendants were released on conditions. Now, the government, by the way, would probably disagree with that statement of him being a model inmate. Remember when they accused Combs of trying to arrange three-way phone calls and buying the use of other inmates' phone privileges to try to make sure the government wasn't listening in, that he was having these private conversations, that he was allegedly trying to contact witnesses in the case, that he allegedly orchestrated a birthday campaign to help his public image while he was locked up. So if we hear a government response, I'm sure they're going to say something about that. Then the defense highlights he's not a risk of flight, he's not a danger to the community, which, by the way, I think are real key points here. But they seem to echo a lot of the same arguments that they have already stated to the court. And remember, they haven't been successful in the past. That he voluntarily came to New York last year to surrender himself to authorities, that he gave up his passport to his attorneys 6 months before his arrest, paid off his mortgage on his Miami home so it was free and clear for him to stay at while out on bond. He was just acquitted of the most serious charges that he was facing, which, by the way, carried decades, if not life in prison. That he's not a risk of flight. That's the basic argument. Now, when it comes to the danger argument, that is key. Why? Judge Subramanian had said after the verdict that the reason he was denying bail was because of Combs' violence, that his own attorneys admitted he was violent during the course of the trial. Well, here is what Combs' defense attorneys argue about that. Quote, the court noted that the defense admitted a history of domestic violence as to Miss Ventura and that he struck Jane twice in June 2024. However, we strenuously object that Mr. Combs poses a danger to the community, aside from a single instance on June 18, 2024, where Mr. Combs was provoked by Jane through her own acts of violence. There was no evidence of any acts of violence in the last 7 years. Indeed, the jury notably rejected the government's argument that the June 2024 incident constituted coercion when it acquitted Mr. Combs of the sex trafficking charge. Also, prior to his arrest in this case, Mr. Combs enrolled in a domestic violence program in which he participated until he was arrested and incarcerated in connection with this case. If released on conditions, Sean Combs will not be violent to anyone. As we said in court, this jury gave him his life back, and he will not squander his second chance at life, nor would he do anything to further jeopardize his 7 children not having a father and 4 of his children not having a parent at all. The court can fashion any set of conditions, and Mr. Combs will abide by any condition to make the court comfortable that Mr. Combs will not be violent toward any person. And that is when they propose the following bail package. That Combs will sign a $50 million bond secured by his home in Miami, that the bond will be co-signed by 3 financially responsible people, that Combs will reside
stepped outside the room to update their superiors. He curled sideways on the bed, shaking, whispering curses under his breath hitched every few seconds. The kind of panic that came from realizing that no amount of money, fame, or connections meant anything in a place where power is measured in violence, alliances, and the ability to survive the night. They moved him to temporary protective custody, but even that wasn't safe. Every hallway echoed with whispers. Eyes followed him, some curious, some calculating, some hungry. Word spread that he was shaken, terrified, weakened, and in prison. Weakness is an invitation. His legal team came storming in hours later, panicked, furious, throwing papers across a table, demanding emergency hearings. demanding immediate transfers, demanding the kind of treatment normally reserved for political cases. But the prison system doesn't bend the way the outside world bends. In here, rules are iron bars. Bureaucracy is quicksand. Every request takes time, signatures, clearances. And while
right after the verdict and didn't have an opportunity for a briefing schedule, how can you make the argument that he is different and that he should be trusted?
Well, I mean, I think, the point you mentioned about the arrest, I mean, unfortunately, Sean has struggled with drug addiction for a long time. And I think one of the good things and positive things is that has come out of his incarceration. It's given him an opportunity, to rehabilitate. He's committed to continuing that. He's committed to a long-term program of therapy and helping with the domestic violence problem that he's had in the past. So, at a certain point, you have to just, maybe it is a leap of faith, but you have to just give a person another chance. And he really is committed to change and to there being a new chapter of service on his part. So, I think we have to hope that the judge will agree with that. And I think we've made a strong case for that.
Do you know when the judge might make a decision on bail?
We don't know.
Okay. If he denies release again, does that give you a sense of what sentencing could be like? Now, to be clear, my understanding is Judge Arun Subramanian even said at the point, if I make a decision on release, it's not indicative of where I'm leaning towards sentencing. I know there's a pre-sentencing investigation still being conducted or has been conducted. There's a lot of factors to consider. But I have to ask about whether this is going to, have an effect on sentencing. Do you believe it's going to have an effect on sentencing? Does it give you a preview of where the judge is lining up? Because my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, you are probably going to be arguing for time served, maybe a minimum of 21 to 27 months. Where do you think the judge is going to go here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you have to take each step at a time and that the judge is not going to prejudge that. There's a lot more information he needs to get, not only the pre-sentence report, but we're going to make a very fulsome sentencing submission. And he's going to have, a much more detailed picture. Even, the trial was about the charges, right? And he doesn't have the full picture of all the factors about Sean's life that he's going to consider. There's going to be a big fight about the sentencing guidelines. We think actually we're going to end up arguing for an even lower guideline range than we had originally believed at the time of the verdict, where we didn't have we had like a couple of hours to try to figure out what to say about bail. So, I hope the judge will grant bail, but I feel confident that even if he doesn't, it doesn't necessarily mean he's not going to sentence Sean to time served. He's going to take everything into account when he gets all the submissions. And, I've got a lot of confidence that the judge is going to be fair and not prejudge the situation.
And you also have this motion for judgment of acquittal, that the Mann Act convictions should be tossed out, Combs be granted at a minimum a new trial. Number of very interesting arguments that are present, and it's basically that there has really never been, as we talked about, a prosecution conviction on a Mann Act like this, that Combs wasn't profiting off of the business. There were all consenting adults that were involved. The jury didn't find that there was any sex trafficking, that this isn't even prostitution per se, it's more voyeurism, that the intent wasn't for people to travel for sex for money, but paid them for their time. They were all having a good time. There's a First Amendment argument that the freak-offs and the hotel nights were performances that were videotaped so he could watch them later. It's amateur pornography. There's an argument that he was prejudiced because of all the other evidence that came in to prove RICO or sex trafficking, but would never have come in if this was merely a prosecution for the Mann Act violations. Specifically, we talk about the Intercontinental Hotel footage. But couldn't the counter argument be, if you look at the text messages and voice notes,
lawyers argue, inmates act. People inside the walls don't care about his music, his empire, his fame, or his money. Some resent it, some envy it, some want to make a name for themselves. And when you're Diddy, especially this version of Diddy, the one buried under every scandal imaginable, you're the biggest trophy in the building. This stabbing wasn't an accident. It was a message. And that message is simple: you're not safe here. Insiders say his legal team is going ballistic right now. They're filing urgent complaints, demanding protective custody, arguing that Diddy's life is in legitimate danger. But even that comes with a price, because if he gets moved to isolation, he'll be locked away 23 hours a day, Alone. In a tiny cement box. Is that safer? Maybe. Is it hell? Absolutely. And Diddy knows it. That's why people say he's spiraling, because every option in front of him is terrifying. Stay in general population? He might get attacked again. Go into isolation? He might lose his mind. This stabbing is more than an incident, it's a turning point. A violent reminder that the world he built, the power he flexed, the influence he enjoyed, none of it matters now. Inside those walls, survival comes before everything. And right now, Diddy is struggling to survive. The medical wing is treating him, but insiders say he's emotionally wrecked. The fear is real, the vulnerability is real, the sense of falling with no control is real. And once he's medically cleared, he has to go right back into the same system that nearly killed him. This story isn't just unfolding, it's accelerating. And if this is what's happening now, the next chapter could be even darker.